everyone knows that the anti-foods don't benefit our health. But today we're going to go beyond empty calories, beyond lack of expiration dates, and look at another way in which they actually harm you, which is by upsetting the balance of good and bad bacteria in the gut. From hand sanitizers to dirty births, we're going to dive deep into the topic of microbiota with Dr. Brett Finlay. He is a PhD and author of Let Them Eat Dirt on today's Nutrition Heretic podcast. So I'm sure you've heard that as you age, it gets harder to lose weight. Well, that's total bullshit because my friends Laura and Veronica Chows, they can prove it. They're a mother-daughter duo, and they've lost 125 pounds between the two of them at ages 50 and 20. And they've kept it off for over 2 years without starvation, deprivation, or hunger. So now you can learn their system and a whole lot more with a free 10-day trial to their online membership. They'll give you the diet, the recipes, classes, and more. Sign up today at nutritionheretic.com/utmost-diet.
Fat is bad for you.
I just pop a pill and I'm fine.
Meat is murder. It's time for bad food punishment. It's time for real nourishment. It's time for the Nutrition Heretic.
The following program is provided as information only and may not be construed as medical or health advice. It is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any disease. No action or inaction should be taken solely on the basis of the information provided here. Please consult with a licensed healthcare professional or doctor on any matter relating to your health and well-being. Hello, this is Adrienne Hugh, the Nutrition Heretic, and welcome to the show. Today, I wanted to talk about nasty children. It was actually my daughter's first birthday party. We had it at a living history farm. And there was one mom who was, upon opening the goodie bag, feeding her child crayons. And a few minutes later, I caught him sitting behind an area that a horse had just plowed and pooped through, eating the dirt. And while I know that germs are our friends, I kind of stop at eating crayons and poopy dirt. And so for that reason, I wanted someone who is an actual expert on the subject. And so today's guest heretic is Dr. Brett Finlay, and he is the author of Let Them Eat Dirt. And he's going to tell me whether my instinct to not feed my child feces-infested dirt is good, or if I'm doing my children a disservice by doing that. Welcome to the show, Dr. Finlay.
Hi, Adrienne.
Thank you so much for being on the show. This is, it was actually, my assistant Crystal who had told me about your book. And, we were really, this is, I think, something that everybody's talking about, because we are recognizing that we have over-sanitized ourselves. And I think you would agree with that.
Yep, for sure.
And that, our children are suffering for it. It's not, it's definitely not the only solution, but it's one piece, a very important piece of this bigger picture of our children gradually becoming less healthy than their grandparents were.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of a hangover. For the last 100 years, we've been on this quest to clean up our world because we know that gets rid of infections. That's how kids used to always die, and yet very few kids die of infections. So in a sense, it's been wonderful. Our kids don't die of what they used to always die of. But the problem is that we now realize that, oops, this had unintended consequences in our sanitizing all our world and safe food and safe water and antibiotics. We knew that decreased infections, but we now realize that we actually are obliterating a lot of the microbes that we as a species have actually evolved with. And so our kids don't get these microbes early in life. And ironically, that's actually having a big impact on the diseases that if you look around our world that we live in today, obesity, asthma, diabetes, allergies, inflammatory bowel disease, autism, these all have microbial links. And it's just been stunning in the last 5 years to realize that we actually really do need these microbes early in life to basically have a healthy body.
Right. As you're talking, so many things have come to mind. One of the first ones was a study done, I believe it may have been on pigs, that this was, going back probably 20 years now, where they fed a group of pigs a sterile diet. Basically, kind of a human, what has evolved to the American diet, which is, stuff that's all in boxes and bags and cans, right? So all that stuff is sterilized, and basically they died.
Well,
because they left them with a completely sterile gut.
Well, unless they were born sterilely. I mean, from the second you're born, you do acquire microbes. But
True.
We do know that diet has a profound impact. I mean, the expression "you are what you eat." Well, really, your microbes are what you eat, because they're the ones that break down most of the food. And depending on what you eat, so our Western diet, which consists, as you say, of a lot of white sugars, white fat, and processed foods, that's actually very simple foods, and they're absorbed out of the intestine, really high up in the small intestine. Yet all the microbes are way down low in the large intestine. And so, ironically, by eating all this white sugar and fat, this doesn't even actually get down to the microbes, and they actually starve. So, it's boring, I know, but basically, the idea of eating, fruit, vegetables, legumes, fiber, nuts, etc. Major part of that reason is that stuff is harder to digest, and it takes the microbes down in the lower intestine to break these things down. So, we really have to rethink for a whole bunch of reasons what we eat, because these quote healthy diets are not just healthy for you, they're actually healthy for your microbes, which actually does make you even healthier.
Right. Yeah. And I just interviewed a woman. She is a GAPS practitioner. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that protocol, but it's one of the more successful ways that parents are healing their children with autism and, dyslexia, dyspraxia, you name it, many of these neurological type disorders. And the creator of that diet is a woman originally from Russia, and she says that there used to be a time where every bite of our food contained microbes. Mm-hmm. And we've shifted that dramatically to this almost completely sterile, like you say, full of white sugar and highly processed. I hesitate to call them foods,
but they're so good, and
that's the thing is we've been off of it for so long that it really doesn't taste good to us. And my kids, they were not raised on it. They see their friends have it. Every once in a while they get the curiosity, but 9 times out of 10, they're disappointed.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing we get into the book is the idea is that, start them early and, teach them what's really good, so they can kids will actually enjoy fruit and vegetables, believe it or not, our whole society, I think we have some serious nutritional issues. And we used to think, you'd eat fruit and vegetables because that gave you the vitamins and, the nutrients you need. And what we now realize piled on top of that is that you also need all these foods to feed your microbes and give you lots of diversity in your microbes, which then actually benefits you.
Right. Absolutely. And, but by the way, my kid yelled at me a couple of weeks ago because I was in a rush and I didn't make a salad. So I think that I achieved my mission and getting them to enjoy, just regular food, real food. I mean, there is no real food. It used to just be food, right? So there's food and there's the anti-food. So. It's, like you say, you start them early, and even, honestly, I always say to people, just eat the best quality you can afford. It doesn't have to be so organic necessarily, although that could help, depending on who's defining organic, when they're raising that food. I love to pat myself on the back that I can feed anybody's child or picky eater, just do the best you can, and the food takes care of itself. People don't realize that you don't need to really doctor it up a lot if it's if it's fresh, and it doesn't take. It's not that much of a learning curve as we've been led to believe. So
probably have more microbes on it too.
Yeah, well, there you go. Absolutely,
package, ultra processed. Yeah,
absolutely. So when people think about germs, right? Whether it's good or bad, they think about the infectious disease.
Yep.
When, talking about this whole sterilizing of the body, like what other non-infectious diseases? I mean, you did give us a little bit of a segue into that, but what are some of the other non-infectious diseases that are going to appear?
Well, when you say the word germ, that has bad connotations. That generally means a microbe that can make you sick. Yet, ironically, very few microbes actually will make you sick. There's less than 100 microbacterial species that cause disease in humans, yet you have probably 1,000 or 2,000 or 10,000 different microbes on you, which are just happily living in and on you. So I think germs is a bit misused. I mean, I think it should be safe for the ones that we really don't want that cause disease. So, but related to that, this dearth of early life microbes is leading to many of the diseases that we see in, if you want to call them Western society diseases. So let's take, for example, asthma. When I was a kid many years ago, nobody had asthma. We had one kid in our school, and must be mutant, right? Because he had to have a puffer. We didn't know what these things were. Right. Now you go to the playground, it's like a kid takes a puff, runs up a slide, and hands a puffer to the kid next to him, and then takes a puff and sort of passes it around. Asthma has just gone through the roof in our society in the last 50 years. Yet we have not genetically changed as a species, so something has happened.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
we now know that, again, just talking about asthma, for example, simple fact, how you're born by cesarean section or vaginally, you will have a 20% higher rate of getting asthma if you're born by C-section. If you have a dog versus no dog, you have a 20% less chance of getting asthma. If you're breastfed versus bottle fed, you have a 20% less chance of asthma. If you get antibiotics in the first year of life, you have a 20% higher chance of getting asthma. So all these things are pointing to these microbes involved in this, in asthma. And it's not just asthma. We know it's allergies. We know it's weight gain, obesity, because the microbes metabolize your food, which is obviously related to type 2 diabetes, all the inflammatory bowel diseases. There's close microbial links. And a more contentious area, but it's getting a lot of attention now, is this whole gut and brain axis. And we now realize that microbes actually play a role in how the brain develops. So there's been experiments done in animals that are, we call them germ-free. They're basically born sterilely by C-section and kept sterile. So they're microbe-free animals. These things, their brains don't develop normally. They have serious behavioral issues. And we also know that, there's some amazing experiments like stress and anxiety and depression. You can induce these in animals like mice and rats and actually do a fecal transfer from a depressed mouse or rat into a normal mouse or rat. That animal will get depressed just by doing a fecal transfer. And all you've done is swap the microbes. And there's many hints in humans that, overuse of antibiotics. There's a huge study just out in the UK showing that increased antibiotic use is heavily correlated with depression and anxiety and stress.
Absolutely.
And then that takes you into the harder realm of autism and ADHD and things, which are of course increasing. And there's smoking guns that there's microbes involved in this, but I think the verdict is still out. There seems to be some involvement, but we don't know for sure yet.
Well, all I know is that the practitioners that I've been working with and who have trained me over the last 20 years, we've all been talking about gut bacteria and brain health, particularly with the autism rise, and every child that I know of that's been treated this way has recovered or is on the road to recovery or has made leaps and bounds above their friends who didn't have any change in what they've done.
Is it the food affecting the microbes? And, we know that autistic kids, for example, they have different microbes in their gut, but they also have different eating habits and stuff. So cause and effect is still. But there's an awful lot of stories of people saying, my kid was normal and they went on antibiotics and became autistic, and then I did a fecal transfer and they got better kind of thing. They're not done under clinical conditions, but you certainly hear this out there. And so it's under intense scientific investigation now. People are chasing this down and saying, is this real or not? But I think even as you age, dementia and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, these things, ironically, are now having microbial components to them.
Absolutely.
And one amazing thing for the more older listeners is that brushing your teeth, you do that, you basically cut your risk of Alzheimer's by 22 to 65% by just brushing your teeth 3 times a day versus if you don't.
Wow.
That has to do with the gum health, the periodontitis.
Yeah, for sure.
And this seeps into your body. All the microbial products causes inflammation, which then basically leads to dementia. So
right.
It's a complex world. But
well, I mean, when I think about people with periodontal disease, I don't necessarily think of somebody who's eating a salad every day either. So, just in terms of, just these highly refined, sugar diets. A lot of the autistic children that I have, the autistic children that I've, worked with, or my colleagues have worked with, most of them have come in with, juicy fruit in their back pocket or whatever candy of the day as their breakfast. There's definitely a strong correlation between just this unadulterated, highly refined foods that are just, they're like a punch in the face of sugar.
They're cheap calories, but I think we have to rethink food in general because
absolutely.
And also putting it in the context of feeding the microbes instead of feeding the human as well, because we know that's actually plays a huge role. And you can really, the fastest way to shift your microbes is shift your diet. Like if you decide to go on a diet within a day, that is reflected by the microbes in your gut. And I think we all kind of know this when you eat something, you go traveling to a foreign country, you can see the results of that at the other end.
Yeah.
I think we have to rethink this whole concept of nutrition, and calorie is not a calorie.
Right. Exactly. Well, I think for me, I want to say the smartest thing that we can do is go back to a time where we had decent sanitation and our diet was more reflective of things that actually could grow in nature. And use that as our starting point, if that makes sense. You know what I'm saying? Just
getting further and further away from the farm. That's very true. But there is another concern that's come up, and I think it's something that is not really talked about yet. We might think about, and that is the fact that each generation we get cleaner and cleaner, and the question becomes: can we go back the way having the microbes that your great grandparents had? And the weird concept that maybe each generation has fewer and fewer different kinds of microbes, that maybe we can't go back that way, and maybe these are endangered species, and maybe we ought to protect our intestinal microbes, because other than a road trip to Africa or something, we might not actually be able to repopulate or repopulate, as we're very fond of saying, the microbes that our ancestors had. So ideally, we go back to those kind of microbes, but of course, without the disease-causing ones that came back then with it.
Right. Well, one of the things I learned from Dr. Campbell McBride is that many of the insidious, dangerous germs, microbes, whatever you want to call them, that are taking over now may actually serve a purpose in smaller quantities.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily eradicating all of them as much as it may be just keeping the good bacteria strong enough to keep those in control. Things like E. coli, or Candida albicans. In small amounts, they're harmless and may even serve a purpose. But the fact is that we've destroyed the things that normally control them, and we've continued to feed them this highly processed diet that is encouraging their overgrowth.
Yeah. Well, 2 points. That's something that scientifically we call competitive exclusion, and we know that good microbes are very good at outcompeting bad ones. And for example, if how many times women that take an antibiotic for something and they end up with a yeast infection, because what happens is that antibiotic works, wipes out the normal microbes, and they're more susceptible to these yeast infections. So we know that this whole competitive exclusion is really important for skin infections, all over the body, wherever there are microbes. So I think, you really do have to pamper your good microbes. The other thing we know is that basically the more microbes you have on you, different kinds, the better you are. We call this diversity, and
Yeah.
there's this high diversity of microbial composition. And one of the easiest ways to get high diversity is eat a diverse diet, because you'll be feeding all these different kinds of microbes. So, and again, as you know, in our society, we've gone to a not very diverse diet a lot of the time. And this has the unintended consequences of just selecting for a few microbes. And as you say, this just have a few dominating species, it's not good in terms of a healthy microbial society.
Right. Another thing that comes to mind when you talk about whether or not we can actually go back, and I'm sure my listeners are fed up of me talking about this, but I've been studying something called Korean natural farming, which, then starts to dovetail with other systems of permaculture and regenerative agriculture in general. And one of the things that I'm learning, particularly through this Korean method, is the balance, how to encourage the correct balance of microbes in soil. And it's really quite fascinating, because when you look at regenerative agricultural models overall, whether it's, ramial chipped wood, or Korean natural farming, or Alan Savory's techniques, there is an ability to quite rapidly replenish topsoil and to create the balance that crops actually need to outpace the weeds around them. And I think that's a really powerful demonstration of what we could achieve in our bodies if we understood better how to provide what in the farming methods are considered homeopathic amounts of the right nutrients to encourage the growth of the right microbiota in the soil, and therefore in us.
Yeah, that analogy holds if you think, the way we farm now, where there's massive swaths of a monoculture type thing. We know that from a soil microbe point of view, that's not good. You would ideally have, diverse plants growing in different areas, and then that's why you rotate crops, for example, so you can get a lot of different microbes going there. And I think the same applies for what we eat. And the concept, it's not hard, that if you eat a bunch of different things, that you're going to select for a bunch of different microbes. You eat the same thing, you will just get a few microbes that you're selecting for. So yeah, that concept, that's the thing. That analogy is really good.
Yeah, so I think that once we get these two systems, overall to converge, and we start to recognize that connection more deeply, and what works for one must work for the other to some extent, right? Because that's what we're going to be feeding on.
Yeah. Well, soil microbes, it's important to have a diverse soil microbes, because that's going to then come up on the food and the potatoes and the carrots or whatever else you're eating.
Right.
And, I think, we know that we're very, very influenced by the environment we live in. And so even, having a monoculture of bacteria in a soil crop is not good for the food point of view, for our point of view.
Right. And I actually made a faux pas recently, because I am also using this Japanese composting system called bokashi, which is essentially made of lactic acid bacteria with molasses on wheat bran. And it's basically, you can compost food in less than 5 weeks using this system. That's how aggressively this system works. But what happened is you get this kind of, a liquid that drains off of it, sort of like a compost tea. And I took just a tiny bit of it and I diluted it with 2 gallons of water. I'm talking like a teaspoon to 2 gallons of water. And I put it on a couple of plants. And apparently, because that's not working on the fungal side, it works, more by, bacteria. It almost killed my plants. It made the leaves fall off. And it was described to me by actually someone who was another guest on the show, Chris Trump, that what happened, what I ended up accidentally doing was shocking it almost as if I had put Roundup on it. So, really understanding the types of microbes that we're working with is essential as well, and understanding where to balance which type of microbes, I think is also something that we
it's a
need
challenge
to
because right now we could, okay, gross alert, but you could take a little dab of feces and put it in the swab, and we can actually analyze all the microbes that are in there. There's ways of sequencing. We can do that without growing them. So we can actually get a list of which microbes are in your intestine versus someone else's.
Right.
But the problem is with that list is we don't know what that really means yet. And we know that even though you and I are 99.99% identical, although I guess we differ by a chromosome, but other than that, we're similar. Most humans are virtually identical genetically. There's just a tiny number of changes, yet all our microbes are very different. At best, someone is maybe 50% similar to someone else. So if you believe the tenet that microbes are important and the other tenet that all, things are conserved in biology, why the heck are we each so different? So that's led to the idea that really sort of instead of a list of the microbes in your gut, there should be a list of all the genes those microbes encode. So what are they capable of doing?
Right.
And it doesn't matter of which microbe is capable of doing it, like, I don't know, a city, it doesn't matter if one person is collecting garbage or another, the garbage will get collected kind of thing. And so we're starting to rethink microbes instead of a list from a microbiologist point of view. Here's a list of all the names of the microbes. We're now starting to think of the whole composition of, okay, you need these 10,000 genes expressed in your gut to have healthy digestion.
Right.
And it really doesn't matter which microbe does it. And so that's why, we're so similar, yet our fecal microbes will be so different. They're still doing the same things.
Right. And see, to me, this is a better definition, or not definition, but a better expression of, when people say something is hereditary, my child's asthmatic because my grandfather had asthma, or I have allergies, or whatever. And to me, the expression is not necessarily in the genes as much as it is they've inherited more than just this genetic pattern from you. There's if you don't have it, for example, when you test the microbes of parents of autistic children, just going back to that again, you find that somebody's got Asperger's, somebody's got dyslexia. It's not uncommon to find relational things there. And then, of course, they're all eating the same diet. So, if you don't have it, it's kind of hard to hand it over to your kids.
They could have, similar, religious beliefs, which are, farming techniques. I think one thing that's come out when we're writing this book that really I found quite fascinating is, yes, we inherit the genes from our parents, but we also now realize you actually inherit the microbes, a lot of your microbes from your mother.
Absolutely.
And so not only is the mother passing along her genes, she's actually passing along her microbes too. And the concepts of, if a mother happens to be obese, their microbes are shaped a certain way, that kid stands a good chance of inheriting those microbes, and they stand a higher chance of obesity by having those microbes because they inherited these obesity microbes, if you want to call it that. So this is really shaking up how we think of genetics as not just being, human encoded, but also having these, you inherit your parents' microbes, which is a sort of a new concept in evolution.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you even talked about before when a child is born by C-section versus vaginally, how that's going to change the terrain. And, it's still a ways off, but I think this is more of where we need to start thinking, which is, like you said, that you're not just inheriting the genes. It's the microbes. It's the foundation, the stuff that your food wants to latch onto. And then you complicate it. Actually, I really love the fact that you had a section in there on pregnancy and dirty birth, but also the strep B.
Yeah, Group B strep.
Yeah, Group B strep. And so that actually talk to me a little bit about that. I was overjoyed to see that section. No, seriously.
Section, right? So just to remind your listeners, Group B strep is one of those bad germs, and 20 to 40% of women can carry it, and then if you're born, the kid can get it, and then 1% of those kids can actually get a Group B strep infection, which is a terrible infection. So the way we currently do it is we test for the presence of this Group B strep in a woman's vagina pre-birth, and if she's positive, most most modern medical practice is you treat with antibiotics, which causes an 80% decrease in passing this along to the kid, and therefore saving this small fraction of kids from getting it. But but of course you're giving antibiotics at birth, which is really mucking up the microbes this kid is going to inherit. And also we know these antibiotics also go into the fetus as it's born. So there's issues there, and so the question is, what do you do? And this is where it gets really hard. There are some early studies coming out indicating that, lactobacilli probiotics seem to displace group B strep. This is this competitive exclusion concept again, that if you had these good bugs, it gives group B strep a harder chance to actually hang on to. But right now, there's a lot of studies going on. I can't counsel either way whether you should or should not have antibiotics. There are some people that are biobanking their vaginal microbes so that then they can actually store these things. And if they have, say, for example, have to have a C-section or get treated with antibiotics, you can then recolonize these kids with these vaginal microbes post-antibiotics. So a way of sort of giving them back the microbes that they missed out on. Right. So there's lots of things that are being tried now in this area, and but the final verdict isn't there yet. I mean, we were trying all sorts. We realize antibiotics are not good. We also realize group B strep infection is absolutely terrible from a kid's point of view. So there's lots of different ways that are being tried to see how do we get around this.
Right. Yeah, I think that's going to become just more important as time goes on to find other solutions, because I am of the mind that there's always another way to do things, right? There's, right. We've only been given one option really in this country, but chances are other countries would have. They may have a protocol. Maybe they don't test for it at all. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's standard in Canada with the midwives, especially, to do the vaginal swabs, especially being born by C-section, so that the kid acquires the vaginal microbiota upon birth. It's gross, but you take a vaginal swab and then you put that in the kid's mouth and expose that kid to the microbes they would have normally experienced in a vaginal birth as opposed to C-section. And this is being experimented with group B strep. I have not seen any data, and I don't know any studies saying yay or nay yet. But as you say, it's a different way of doing things. But I think knowing what we know now, we got to think of these other ways.
Absolutely. That actually brings me to the feces talk. We've brought that word up a lot. And a couple of months back, I was I don't know if outraged by it, but I was a little bit disturbed. But in light of reading your book, it makes more sense now. And actually, I know somebody who sells these poop pills. I know that there's some studies on using the feces of a thin person to give to overweight people so that they will colonize with thin bacteria.
It works nice. It's still to be proven in humans. But yeah, so let's talk fecal transfers. I mean, it may be crap to you, but it's my bread and butter, and so we like it a lot.
Bread and butter will never taste the same again.
Think of me all the time. So yeah, I mean, the way this started out, where there's this infection that people get, especially going for surgery, you take antibiotics so the surgeon doesn't cause an infection, and which is good in that sense. But we now realize these antibiotics also wipe out the microbes. And especially in older people, they get Clostridium difficile or C. diff, which is a really terrible infection. Mm-hmm. Now, this infection, C. diff is actually often present in your gut, but in small numbers, and doesn't cause any infection because all the other microbes exclude it. But if you take an antibiotic, you wipe out the good microbes and the bad ones come up, and this thing takes over, and it can cause a life-threatening infection. So this disease is caused by taking antibiotics. So traditionally, the way they tried to treat it was with antibiotics, right? But the problem is
fight fire with fire.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah. So what they got a big bonfire. Basically, it doesn't works maybe 20%. So then they realized, well, okay, this is because we've gotten rid of the good microbes. So maybe we can do a fecal transplant, squish these other good bugs in, and it'll work. And it works beautifully. You get like a 95% cure rate in what is a lethal disease, often lethal disease. Stunning. And the data is overwhelming. So that's now become standard practice for C. diff. So that was the first real medical proof that fecal transfers work. Now, of course, people see this as well. Let's try it for inflammatory bowel diseases. Let's try it for autism. Let's try it for all these other things. But the problem is that C. diff is actually, I hate to say it, but it's really kind of a wussy pathogen. We knew that you could pretty much add any bug into it and you will knock it out. So that's why it works so well. But think about inflammatory bowel disease. You have a gut that's already inflamed, and you're then trying to put in good microbes. You're kind of asking, it's kind of like putting microbes on a bonfire or a barbecue, tell them to put it out and then reestablish and take over and, put the fire out and colonize. So it's a big ask. So now what we realize with fecal transfers is you have to know about who the donors are. Like there's sometimes a donor works great and sometimes it doesn't. And that's what we're seeing in these fecal transfer experiments. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. So I think where we're kind of stuck back to is we have to rethink what is a good donor. Like this person, they always work, and this one, they never work. So you can go back and say, well, what bugs do they have versus these don't? So that's where the field is now. So, they're all the rage. Lots of people are trying them in many different diseases. But I think they're running into the donor problem because each person's different. And you'll read studies where, it wasn't working, then someone walked in, donor B walked in, and suddenly they got the magic juice and it works great. And so you get to publish a study because it worked. But so I think we've got to know more about, who the donor is and what these microbes are. Because where we're going to get to is we're going to get, as you say, these poop pills. We're going to get beyond that. We're going to get to a defined population. Here's a pill of 30 microbes we know that you should take if you're at risk for, you pick your favorite disease. And then those microbes will actually colonize. They're from the gut. They will set up camp, and then they will, give you the benefits. So it's a bit of hit and miss now for everything except C. diff with fecal transfers.
Right.
It's a great concept.
Right. Well, yeah, I was going to say when you were talking about C. diff, because it's funny, I've had a lot of clients over the years who kind of straddle two lines, right? So they come to me, but they just don't believe that food can do that much. So they're still seeing, their doctor, whatever. And so I've had a couple of people end up with C. diff, and every single one of them blamed whatever I was doing. Well, it wasn't like that crazy amount of people, but they blamed whatever I was doing. And then I found out one worked in a hospital. Another one had taken an antibiotic for something. Another one took another drug for something. And they, 3 or 4 of them ended up with C. diff from various hospital encounters. And so I, treated them the way that I would with enteric-coated probiotics and a few other things. And within a couple of days, they were, like 2 days, literally, they were better. However, I guess what I'm wondering about the poop pills, and are we looking at something to be a one-shot approach? Because in the holistic and naturopathic communities, people are healing their gut bacteria, at least enough that they feel normal, as normal can be. The rashes go away, the asthma goes away, the autism goes away, the joint pains, you name it, IBD or IBS, all of that, everything is going away. But it's rigorous work. It involves over-the-counter or pharmaceutical grade probiotics, supplementing certain nutrients, the whole foods diet, including actually, a lot of bone broths, which is one of the buzzwords today, and other animal foods as well as the plant foods. And they're seeing results. When we look at a solution like poop pills, are we trying to avoid having to have people do all the other stuff? Is it that effective that people can just kind of go back to their old habits, or, is this intended to work in conjunction with other modalities and other approaches and other solutions?
Well, I think with C. diff, it's pretty simple. And then generally speaking, a fecal transfer will be enough to recolonize the gut and displace it and actually work. With all the others we talked about, there's a lot of discussion. How many times do we have to transfer? There's a study out of Australia where they're doing it every second day for God knows how long for inflammatory bowel disease, and actually showed great results. And I think what you're pointing to is the whole complexity of what you're trying to do is really reestablish a normal, healthy gut microbe. And as you point out, this is very complex and takes many different things. It takes the diet, it may take probiotics, it may take feces, and I mean, one of my pet peeves is that, I say a vaginal microbe that's used as a probiotic like lactobacillus, you're asking to go into the intestine and you're taking it with 100 billion every day. None of them stick because that's why you have to take it every day.
Right.
And I think those are the wrong. I'm waiting for probiotic 2.0s to come out, which is say a gut microbe that came from a human gut. It's designed to live in there. You can take it. It'll take hold. It knows it's in the gut. It'll divide and multiply. Whereas the current ones, you have to take them every day because they don't stick at all and they're just secreted out.
Well, I think part of the reason. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
So we can get smarter in our probiotic design. And I think that's what we're going to start to see, where we say, okay, you are missing, like our own work with asthma, we found that, 3-month-old kids, if they lack these 4 microbes, they basically were going to get asthma. If they had those microbes, they wouldn't get asthma. So that begs the question, can you then test a kid and then add these 4 microbes back so that you can prevent them from getting asthma later in life? So that's where the fields are starting to go in all these diseases. We're going to define we know these microbes will do this, and then those will be what will be in the poop pills of the future. It will be the right microbes instead of just this shotgun approach. We'll try anything.
Right.
And even in diet, I mean, if you change your diet, you're selecting for many different bacteria. It's not a targeted approach. You're just hoping that, the good one's in there with a whole bunch of other ones. The diet changes, and we're not that smart yet.
Right. I think one of the missing pieces for a lot of people when they are taking probiotics is that because this is the way I've learned it and the way that I've, worked for the last 20 years, which is that they take the probiotics, which by the way, 20 years ago did not exist according to the standard, line of the AMA. They just it didn't exist. Anybody who said anything about probiotics and good, gut flora was a quack, right? So enter Activia, and now it exists. Okay, so we've taken that it exists, but I think what I've seen as the missing component is what you alluded to before, which is the inflammation in the gut. So it's sort of like that same, I forget how you said it exactly. I'm just going to say it's somebody, peeing on a bonfire, trying to put it out, right? So, instead of, doing whatever you need to get it under control and get rid of the excess of bad guys and calm the inflammation, they're just throwing the probiotics on top of something that's not prepared to take it up.
That's right. So there's a lot of discussion. Well, maybe, say, inflammatory bowel disease, you should be taking an anti-inflammatory, which will dampen the inflammation at the same time you then try and colonize these microbes. So we put up a website for the book, letthemeatdirt.com, and on there, I've linked it to a really good study that basically it cites all the double-blind, placebo-controlled trials of probiotics that have worked for various diseases. So these are all the ones that Western medicine says, yes, these actually have worked. Now, probiotics, they get a mixed bag because they're not regulated the same as FDA-regulated drugs, so you can claim more. And so they've certainly taken a hit in that area. But there's no doubt that sometimes they work. And so this is really neat because it sort of shows the studies where these probiotics actually do work in a clinical medical setting. And you can't argue with that. That is our current standard of proof for something that works in Western medicine, and some of them do. So I think there is hope there. But like I say, I think we can get a heck of a lot smarter, and we don't assume that lactobacillus will cure everything from skin wrinkles to baldness to and one microbe does it all. I think that's a myth too. I also think probiotics of the future will not be a single microbe. That it will be a mixture of 20, 30, 40 different ones that work as a community. Right. Because the way the probiotic field works now is a company has their favorite probiotic and they ask scientists around the world to try anything that they can possibly get it to work in. And in the future, I think we'll be looking at mixes of microbes that have a even better beneficial effect. And I think you'll see a bigger bounce in probiotic effectiveness. And I think it'll get more accepted by sort of Western medicine type means. Well,
yeah, definitely in at least in this country, in the holistic sphere, there's at least even in the beginning, like for me, the beginning, which was a little over 20 years ago, they were already using multiple strains of bacteria, and there's definitely been a tendency towards more of that. Much more diversity in what's being offered, at least on the professional level. Maybe not as much, as far as what you can pick up in the regular vitamin store. But there's definitely been a trend towards that, and I'm leaning more and more. I'm leaning towards something that you're also sort of discussing here, which is, like you said, the shotgun approach. We're just going to overwhelm the system with all of these microbes, we're going to put 50 billion,
They use 100 billion to make it work.
Right, exactly.
Day, according to the label, but of that, there's not necessarily 100 billion viable microbes. I've had
there's that.
Plate them out and say, well, actually, there's not quite that many that they say. They're not alive.
Right. Well, this is where I'm going with this, which is that there's the the lessons, like I'm saying, from Korean natural farming is that you really only need a homeopathic amount. Maybe it's at the lower doses, because we are finding out that, with a lot of things, and we see this, we're more readily admitting this with plants than we are with humans, that sometimes it's the homeopathic amounts that have the best uptake. Because when you overwhelm the system, it's like, what the fuck do I do with all of this? It's just too much, and so almost out of panic, a system could theoretically reject something because it's just too much. But in small amounts, it could be just insidious enough to support. Maybe,
but the way I think of it, I think probiotics, you're adding, 100 billion a day. I think you're adding basically a product, which is this microbial gook, whereas if you only add a small amount, you're probably adding a microbe that actually can colonize and grow, and then it can, expand its influence that way just by a small amount. Because if you ingest a microbe and it can inhabit the gut, you can ingest one and it will rapidly grow into, tens, billions, millions, trillions, kind of thing, because they can grow. But I think the current probiotics are mainly added side shows, because really it's just the microbial, molecules that you're adding. You're not adding a seed that's going to grow. You're just taking the harvest as such.
Right. Exactly. And that's kind of where I was leaning towards as well, which I think that sometimes at the smaller amounts, and we've seen this with different drugs. We also had a regenerative agriculture specialist talking about actually it was about Monsanto pesticides and things, and saying that, they say that that the studies show that they use these huge amounts and that there was nothing to happen, but that's because, the system, the organism died, or, it was so overwhelmed, it knew that it had to reject being the onslaught of all of this. But when they put it at the low amounts that they actually use it in nature, it becomes part of the matrix within the plant. So I kind of lean sometimes in certain ways towards, maybe us just going after the billions and trillions of supposedly colonizing bacteria. Maybe we need to back down to what the body would naturally want to take
another
up.
Trend where the idea is, you would engineer probiotics. So let's say it's a pretty decent probiotic. Then you could say engineer it to produce, say, an anti-inflammatory while you're at it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that there are several experiments going on in that area where you basically genetically engineer a probiotic. So with not only the probiotic, it has other benefits too. And I think we'll see those come to market in a while.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm down with that yet, but I'll have to see what they come up with.
So. The data, they're just, we'll see. Time will tell. I don't think there's any studies.
Yeah, I'm of the don't reinvent the wheel.
So I'm saying here's another way of potentially doing it. If you've got inflammatory bowel disease and this one actually works, I'm not going to argue with that if it works.
Right. No, I hear you. But I always feel like we already have the answers in front of us, and some of the experiments that are going on might be moving us further away from where we want to go, as opposed to in the direction that we're hoping to head towards. Now, we're going to have to wrap up kind of soon, but one thing I wanted to know is, when at the outset I talked about this kid eating horse poop, right, and crayons. At what point can a parent decide that this is healthy dirty? And this is just nasty,
common sense. We certainly get into the book. Let your kid play in the sandbox, but if there's cat feces in the sandbox, don't, because we know that contains parasites, toxoplasma stuff, and that's not good. So you have to balance this sort of this germ avoidance with the idea of natural exposure. We say in the book, for example, it's probably okay if a kid licks the floor in your house, but if they're licking the subway station floor, that's probably not a good idea, right?
Yeah, I had a boyfriend who sat down on the floor of the subway. We stopped dating. It's like, you're not bringing that in my house.
I heard he's a dirty guy. Anyway. Yeah.
Disgusting.
So it's common sense. I mean, I think, obviously we're not saying as soon as your kid's born, start shoveling as much dirt as you can down them. I mean, we don't mean that at all, but we do mean, natural microbial exposure. Because you would think how we evolved as a species, go back kids, 2,000, 10,000 years ago, what were they doing? They're running around playing outside, playing in the dirt. Now, even in the last decade, the kids' screen time has doubled. The average kid spends 7 hours a day in front of a screen. There's very little microbial exposure, in that 7 hours of that kid's life every day. And so I think as a parent, you have to, obviously, if, they're playing with frogs, whatever, that's probably okay. But if the thing's dead and rotting and stinks, don't go there.
Right.
Probably putting the odd rock in their mouth. The kid will figure out, well, that's not much point there after the first two and spit them out, type things. So yeah, it really is. I guess my message is, we've just gone too far in our hyper cleanliness, our attempt to bubble wrap our kids so they don't get exposed to any microbes because they might get sick. And I think the whole irony of it is they are getting sick because they're not getting exposed to microbes. We've got to ease off on that and sort of find the happy balance. You don't have to wash your kids' hands 100 times a day. We're in the playground,
Right.
I always joke. My brother and I had a contest. I grew up on an acreage, and every night we had to have our bath, which we hated. So the goal was how big a ring around the bathtub of dirt could you get? Like how good was your day?
Just to make it.
You got that thing greater than an inch. That was a good day's play, And so, I think you got to balance these things, but just let kids be kids and let them experience the natural world in terms of their microbes, because we know that they need that, and we're not giving it to them yet.
Right. Yeah, and I can attest that my mom was a nurse, trained in the 50s and early 60s, and growing up in the 70s, for me, there's a number of things that fed into it. But yeah, she wasn't as crazy as people are today, but she was quite hygienic. She taught us about hygiene and just not being gross. And, I seem to have a lot of health problems that a lot of other kids didn't have at the time. Yeah, of course, now they all have those problems, and I've gotten rid of most of my problems. So,
oh, good. I'm glad to know you're problem free.
Exactly. I mean, it's just very interesting to see where they've gone, and then as a result, my children are way healthier than I ever was at their ages. Right. And I look at many of my cousins and their kids and so on, and it's not a pretty picture. It's not a pretty picture.
There really is a split in society. There are those who are, I don't mean this insultingly, but they're germaphobes. They were like your mother, who was taught that everything has cleanliness is next to godliness, and there's a reason for that, right. Avoiding infection. And there's others who are the other way. Well, I was born and raised in the dirt, didn't hurt me, so it can't hurt the kid to slop around a bit. And it's interesting in society. There's kind of the two, and I think we got to find a moderate middle where we balance these things and let the kids. Let them be kids.
Yeah. Well, actually, you brought up something else in your book that you talk about is these hand sanitizers.
No, yes.
And like 2 years ago, a friend of mine, she thought she was being nice. She gave my daughter a hand sanitizer, and you get sick of just saying no to everything because you know better, right? You know that it's not great, but it was just like a little small tube. And and the reason why she gave it to her was because it had this holder that had a pig or something on it, some little cute animal character. So I'm like, okay, you can have it. So she's playing with it. Next thing I know, the bottle is gone. Like she's used everything in the bottle. My daughter's completely high. I turn the thing over and it's like 70% alcohol or something ridiculous. And I'm like, oh my God, my kid's drunk. She's only 3. Like,
starting early. Girl.
But yeah, she was totally drunk on this stuff.
Well, that's actually probably a benefit. Long-term hand sanitizer use is not good. I mean, as you know, the FDA has banned some of the antimicrobial agents because the studies show they don't do any good. They don't do any different than just soap and water.
Right.
So regarding to washing, it's soap and water, maybe before mealtime and after going to the bathroom or, some other exposure that is hanging around with a sick person, for example, you should probably wash your hands. But, I've watched parents this weekend, playing in the playground. Every time the kid got off the monkey bars in the jungle gym, they had to have their hands all cleaned and sanitized before they go back to the next event out in the playground kind of thing.
Yeah, no,
that's just wrong. You don't need to do that.
No.
There's no reason for that. And actually, I think it's more harmful than good. But the problem is, I think most people think, and I don't blame them, because I did until a few years too, that, this is probably better for my kid. I mean, if it wasn't better for a kid, they wouldn't do it. At least they think it is. So we have to kind of change that way of thinking a bit. And that's kind of the main purpose of the book.
Right, for sure. Well, it's a fantastic book, and I certainly learned a lot. It gave me a lot more things to think about, and just so many more ideas of how to integrate this in a sane way into my life. Because I've with my kids, I'm lucky if I remember to tell them to wash their hands before dinner. But in other ways, I definitely. I'm like, no, come on. And mostly it's selfish though. It's because I don't want to freaking clean it up. I don't want to clean up your mess. So don't make a mess. If you don't want to clean it, don't make a mess. But, we keep the house basically hygienic. It's not always orderly, but I'd rather have, just the basic hygiene there. And now we have chickens, which I'm learning a whole other,
they
way of exposing them.
Take a load. I remember as a kid, we had to clean the feces off the eggs before we'd eat them all the time. Oh, is that? I thought they came in styrofoam containers. I didn't know they were normally covered in feces. You got to wash them before you eat them. What's that about?
And by the way, this is what I've learned from my farming techniques. You spray lactic acid bacteria diluted in water, and it digests all the feces. So there's no feces in the coop at all.
Oh, you must have it. I don't know.
It's awesome.
Big chunks of feces on these eggs. I remember, getting a chisel out kind of thing.
No, seriously, you will be surprised. I mean, you wouldn't be surprised because this is your work, right? But lactic acid bacteria, which is basically whey, a teaspoon of that to a gallon of water, spray it around, and smells, everything goes, all of that funky stuff, digests the poop and everything.
Oh, it's just natural material. It makes sense.
Yeah. It's just, it's so wacky and it's so cool. And like I said, it just so dovetails with everything that you've talked about in your book.
Yeah.
Yeah. And pigs.
And pigtails too.
I sat about less than 10 feet away from a pig and had no idea it was there until it moved. Because that's how effective, these bacteria can be at cleaning the environment and taking the smell out of poop.
Well, even body odor, for example, you don't stink. It's actually the microbes making these volatile fatty acids that could cause people to have body odor.
Right.
It's actually the microbes doing it. So,
and actually a lot of people are now using that same lactic acid bacteria as deodorant.
Yeah, deodorant, sure, of course.
Yeah. So it's really fascinating what's around us, and to some extent how unnecessary a lot of the things that we think we need from the drugstore, for example, are compared to the microbiota around us. So
absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Brett Finlay. Your PhD, and what's your PhD in again? I forgot to write that down. Biochemistry. Okay, awesome. And he is the author of Let Them Eat Dirt. His website can be found at letthemeatdirt.com. Check out the book. It was a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for your time. And we will see you on the interwebs.
Thank you very much.
All right, great.
The Nutrition Heretic Podcast is a production of Savor the Journey, LLC. Our audio editor is Nikola Popovich. Our podcast manager is Crystal McLean, and our operations manager is Linda Hansen. I'm your host, Adrian Hugh, the Nutrition Heretic. You can find us at nutritionheretic.com, where you can download the Nutrition Heretic's free shit list of 7 health foods to avoid like the plague. You can also listen to previous episodes at nutritionheretic.com/podcast. Be sure to like us on social media for updates. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/nutritionheretic and on Twitter at NutriHeretic. Contact us with show ideas, questions, or if you just want to be a guest. And don't forget to rate our podcast on iTunes and Stitcher. Thanks.